In a remote corner of the American wilderness, not far from the grand sweep of the Appalachian Mountains, lived a modest hunter named Ethan Ashford. He was a man of few words, but his understanding of the land surpassed the most learned scholars of the cities. His cabin stood by the side of a river, a ribbon of blue winding through the woods, connecting the distant mountains to the lowlands. This river, though seemingly calm, was more than just water to Ethan. It was a force that shaped the world around him. One evening, as the sun began to set, Ethan sat outside his cabin sharpening his knife when his young apprentice Samuel approached him. Samuel had long admired Ethan's knowledge of the land, and tonight he had a question that had been troubling him. "Mr. Ashford," Samuel began, "how is it that this river can carve through the mountains yet also bring life to the valley below? How does it all work together?" Ethan smiled and set down his knife. "It's a fine question, Samuel. The answer lies in understanding how the river, this part of the hydrosphere, interacts with the rest of the Earth's systems. Come, sit by the fire, and I'll tell you a tale of how water, earth, wind, and ice shape our world." Samuel eagerly took a seat and Ethan began his story. "Many years ago," Ethan said, "when this land was still wild and untamed, the river ran much higher than it does now. Back then, the water carried with it stones, gravel, and soil from the mountains. This process, called erosion, happens when the flowing water wears away the rocks and carries bits of earth downstream. Over time, these materials settle and are deposited, forming new layers of earth. We call this process deposition." He paused and pointed toward the wide, flat land that stretched beyond the riverbank. "That there, Samuel, is the floodplain. During heavy rains or the spring thaw, the river would rise and flood the surrounding land. When the water receded, it left behind rich soil, perfect for growing crops. That's the hydrosphere, water working with the geosphere, the land. It's like nature's way of sharing wealth from the highlands to the lowlands." Samuel nodded thoughtfully, beginning to see how water not only carved the land, but also nourished it. "But what about the mountains?" he asked. "How do they change?" "Ah, the mountains," Ethan said, his eyes twinkling. "They too are shaped by water, but not just in its liquid form. High up, in the coldest regions, water freezes into ice and forms glaciers. These rivers of ice move slowly, but they are powerful. As they creep down the mountain slopes, they scrape away the rock beneath them, carving valleys and leaving behind huge boulders. When the glacier melts, it deposits the rocks and sediment it has carried with it. Another example of how erosion and deposition work together." Samuel's eyes widened as he imagined the immense force of a glacier grinding its way through the mountains, shaping the landscape as it went. "But what about the air?" Samuel asked. "How does the wind fit into all this?" "Wind too plays its part," Ethan said. "Just like the river erodes the earth, so does the wind. It lifts fine particles of sand and dust and carries them across great distances, sometimes even from one continent to another. The wind is part of the atmosphere, and it interacts with the hydrosphere by moving moisture, evaporated water, from the oceans and lakes. This moisture forms clouds, which bring rain back to the land. So you see, the wind, water, and earth are all connected. They rely on one another." Samuel sat quietly, absorbing the story. It was as if he could see the forces of nature at work all around him. The river carving its way through the valley, the wind carrying rain clouds across the sky, the glaciers slowly moving through the mountains, shaping the world in their path. "Now," Ethan said, leaning forward, "remember that the hydrosphere doesn't just shape the land, it sustains life. Without water, neither plants, animals, nor humans could survive. The water we drink, the rain that nourishes the soil, the rivers that provide food and transportation, all of it comes from the same system. And that system is connected to the rocks beneath our feet, the air we breathe, and the weather we experience." He stood up and stretched, glancing out at the darkening sky. "Everything in nature is a balance, Samuel. The hydrosphere, our rivers, lakes, and glaciers, works with the atmosphere, geosphere, and biosphere to create the world as we know it. Remember that, and you'll begin to understand the land in a deeper way." Samuel stood too, feeling a newfound respect for the river that flowed past the cabin and the mountains that loomed in the distance. The world suddenly seemed larger, more interconnected, and more alive than he had ever realized. As they turned to go inside, Ethan's voice came one last time, soft but steady. The river, Samuel, it's more than just water. It's a storyteller shaping the land, giving life and connecting all things. And that, my boy, is how the hydrosphere interacts with the Earth's other systems. Through this tale, Ethan had not only answered Samuel's questions, but had also woven in the knowledge of erosion, deposition, glaciers and floodplains in a way that felt natural, as if the land itself had whispered the answers.